The Arizona desert stretched endlessly. Dust, heat, and the smell of death. The wagon train had been moving for days without rest, its travelers too weary to notice the dark shapes gathering on the ridges. Clara Whitmore sat at the back of the last wagon, her golden hair tied beneath a bonnet, her blue eyes dulled by sun and fear. Her father's Bible lay open on her lap, but her thoughts wandered, dreams of safety in Santa Fe, of building a new life away from hardship. The first scream shattered those dreams. Out of the shimmering horizon came the Apache riders, swift, painted, fierce as thunder spirits. Horses charged through the line of wagons, arrows slicing through the air. The smell of gunpowder, blood, and burning wood filled the wind. Clara saw her mother fall, her father trying to reach her before an arrow struck his chest. The wagon tipped, throwing her to the ground. She tried to run. Hands seized her. When Clara opened her eyes again, she was slung over a horse, her wrists bound, her dress torn. She couldn't understand the words shouted around her, sharp syllables of a language that rolled like stones in a river. Her captors rode hard through the wilderness, leaving the burning remains of the wagons behind. Hours passed before the world slowed. The Apache war party halted in a canyon carved by centuries of wind. One man dismounted and came toward her. He was tall, his skin bronze from the sun, his hair black as night and bound with a strip of leather. His chest bore the scars of old battles, but what struck her most were his eyes, steady, unreadable, and dark as obsidian. He cut the rope from her wrists. Clara flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, he handed her a canteen. The water tasted of smoke and metal, but she drank until her throat stopped burning. He watched in silence, then turned away as if she no longer existed. That night they camped near the base of the canyon. The warriors laughed around the fire, their voices echoing off the rocks. Clara sat apart, trembling. The image of her parents' bodies burned into her mind. When a young Apache boy threw a piece of meat at her feet, she couldn't eat. Hunger and terror twisted inside her until exhaustion won, and she curled against the cold earth. The next morning she tried to run again. Her bare feet tore on sharp stones, but freedom tasted close, until she heard the hiss. A rattlesnake coiled beside her path, its rattle buzzing like death itself. She froze, unable to breathe. Then came the shadow, Katan, the same warrior who had given her water. His knife flashed, severing the snake's head before it could strike. He turned on her, fury in his voice, his words unintelligible but his meaning clear. He grabbed her arm, not to hurt but to drag her back to safety. When she stumbled, he steadied her, his touch rough but strangely careful. For a long moment their eyes met, and something shifted. She realized he wasn't cruel, not like the others. There was anger in him, yes, but also restraint. He could have let her die. Instead, he had saved her. That night, as the fire crackled and the others slept, Clara watched him from across the camp. He sat alone, sharpening his blade, his gaze occasionally flicking toward her. She didn't know his name then, only that he moved like a shadow, dangerous but deliberate. She whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for understanding. Somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the ache of loss and fear, something unfamiliar stirred. Katan had spared her life, and though she would never admit it aloud, she no longer knew whether she was his prisoner or something else entirely. That was the night Clara Whitmore first realized the Wild West was not made of black and white, but of blood, fire, and the gray heart of a man she was never meant to love. The next days blurred into endless travel, across canyons the color of rust, through thorned brush and sun-baked plains where vultures wheeled above. Clara rode behind Katan on his horse, her wrists still bound but her fear dulled by exhaustion. The Apache spoke little to her, and when they did, she couldn't understand. But she noticed something. Katan was always near. He kept her behind him when tempers flared, shielded her from the cruelest stares. Still, she didn't trust him. Not yet. On the third night, they made camp beside a dry riverbed. The tribe's chief, a stern elder with eyes like a hawk's, barked orders to the warriors. Katan spoke back too sharply. His words sparked a wave of angry shouts. Clara didn't know what they argued about until one of the younger warriors spat at her feet, then turned his knife toward Katan. In an instant, the two men collided. It wasn't a long fight, more like a flash of lightning, quick and violent. Katan ducked a swing, slammed his fist into the man's jaw, and the knife clattered away. But not before it had cut deep into Katan's side. Blood darkened his skin. The chief stepped between them, his voice commanding silence. He spoke harshly to Caton and gestured toward Clara. The meaning was clear even without words. Caton had risked his standing to protect her, and now he would pay. When the camp finally grew quiet, Caton slumped beside the fire, his hand pressed to his wound. No one came to help him. No one cared. Clara watched in the shadows, torn between fear and pity. She waited until the others slept. Then, trembling, she crawled to him. He looked up sharply, his knife half raised, then lowered it when he saw it was her. Sweat glistened on his brow. The cut was deep but not fatal. She tore a strip from her petticoat, ignoring his glare, and pressed it to the wound. "Hold still," she whispered, though she doubted he understood. He hissed through his teeth but didn't push her away. For the first time she saw the pain behind his silence. She cleaned the blood with water from his own canteen, her hands shaking. The air between them felt fragile, as if one wrong breath could shatter it. When she finished, he caught her wrist gently this time. His voice was rough, his English broken. "Why help?" She met his gaze. "Because no one else will." He stared at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he let go. For the rest of the night, she sat beside him, half watching the fire, half watching his face. In sleep, Caton seemed younger, almost peaceful. The hard lines of his jaw softened, and Clara wondered what kind of life could carve so many scars into a man's body, and why he had chosen to save her, when it would have been easier not to. At dawn, Caton stirred, groaning as he rose to his feet. The tribe was preparing to move again. He said something in Apache and gestured for her to follow. She hesitated, but when he offered his hand to help her mount the horse, she took it. The sun climbed higher as they rode through a canyon filled with red rock spires. The silence stretched until Clara couldn't bear it. "Why did you save me?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Then, in halting English, he said, "Because I wanted to see your eyes again." She froze, her heart skipping. It wasn't a threat, not even a compliment, just truth spoken simply. She didn't know how to reply. They rode on, the wind whipping through her hair, the desert spreading wide around them. Somewhere behind them lay the ashes of her old life. Ahead was only wilderness and a man she was beginning to see not as a monster, but as something far more dangerous. A man she might someday come to understand. The storm came without warning. One moment the canyon was quiet, the next it roared with wind and sand that clawed at their faces. The Apache war party scattered for cover, shouting to one another over the howl of the desert. Caton grabbed Clara's wrist and pulled her toward the nearest opening in the rock. Inside, the cave was narrow and cold, the walls damp from hidden springs. Clara coughed, trying to breathe past the dust. Caton dropped their few supplies to the ground, his movements sharp and efficient. He lit a small fire with dry sagebrush, shielding the flame from the gusts that hissed through the entrance. Outside, the desert screamed. Inside, there was only the sound of her heartbeat. She sat against the stone, drawing her knees to her chest, watching him in the flicker of the fire. His shirt was torn from their long ride, and she could see the fresh bandage she had wrapped around his side now soaked through with blood again. The heat rose to her cheeks, part from shame, part from something she didn't want to name. "You're bleeding," she murmured. He looked down, then shrugged. "Storm ends soon," she frowned. "You'll die before it does if you don't rest." He gave a ghost of a smile. "You talk too much," her temper flared. "And you don't talk at all." That earned her a look, sharp but not cruel. A faint spark in those dark eyes, like the smallest ember refusing to die. He pulled off his belt knife and tossed it to her. "Cut," he said, pointing to the bandage. She hesitated, then obeyed. The cloth peeled away, sticky with blood. She bit her lip as she pressed a new strip torn from her underskirt against the wound. He didn't flinch, but his breath quickened when her fingers brushed his skin. She could feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of smoke and earth that clung to his body. When she looked up, their faces were close, too close. She froze and he leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Enough," he said quietly. Clara sat away, her pulse thudding in her ears. She stared into the fire, trying to steady herself. Outside, the wind screamed louder, but inside the cave, an even greater storm raged. Hours passed. The fire dimmed and the temperature dropped. Clara shivered in her torn dress. Caton noticed but said nothing. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he removed the heavy blanket from his pack and held it out to her. She blinked. what about you? He pointed toward the fire. I have flame. She took it reluctantly. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't answer. But as the night deepened, she noticed him moving closer to the entrance as if guarding it. When thunder cracked across the sky, she startled. Katan turned his head slightly, and in the faint firelight their eyes met again. You fear? He asked. Yes, she admitted. Everything, he nodded, his voice softening. Good. Fear make heart strong. For a moment she almost smiled. And what makes yours strong? He stared into the fire for a long time. Then quietly he said, Loss. The storm raged for 2 full days. They ate sparingly, shared water, and spoke little. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers. Sometimes she would catch him watching her, not with hunger or cruelty, but curiosity, as if he too didn't understand what was happening. When the storm finally broke, sunlight spilled into the cave, warm and gold. Clara stepped to the entrance and looked out at the washed, clean desert. Katan came to stand beside her. She whispered, It's beautiful. He nodded once. Yes. Then after a pause, added softly, So are you. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She turned to face him, but he was already walking away, gathering his things. Outside, the desert waited, wild, untamed, and full of danger. But Clara realized that the greatest danger of all was now inside her own heart. By the 4th day after the storm, the world around them had turned quiet. Too quiet. The war party that Katan once rode with had vanished into the desert, leaving only the 2 of them behind. Whether by choice or by order, Clara didn't know. But she could sense it in Katan's manner. They were on their own now, walking a path that neither could turn back from. They rode through a valley of golden grass and twisted junipers, the air heavy with the scent of rain. Katan's wound had begun to heal, though he hid the pain well. Clara's fear had dulled into something more complicated. A deep, aching awareness of the man who rode before her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of his back against her palms as she held onto him. Sometimes, she caught herself studying the slope of his shoulders or the way the sunlight caught in his hair, and shame would flood her cheeks. What was she doing? Feeling this way for a man who had stolen her from everything she knew? And yet wasn't it also true that he had saved her, fed her and shielded her when no one else would? When the day's ride ended, they made camp in a grove of pines. Clara gathered wood while Katan hunted. He returned with a rabbit, cleaned it, and roasted it over the fire. She watched him in silence, her hands folded in her lap. Why do you keep me alive? She asked suddenly. He didn't look up. You live, I live. Same sun. That's not an answer. He smiled faintly. Then ask better question. Clara frowned, staring into the fire. The words came out before she could stop them. Does it hurt to love for the first time? Katan stilled. The flames cracked softly between them, the night air thick with unspoken meaning. She hadn't meant it as a confession. She wasn't even sure what it meant. But once said, it could not be taken back. He rose slowly and came around the fire. She didn't move. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. He crouched before her, his face half lit by the fire's glow. Love, he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. You ask if it hurt. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Katan reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was light, reverent almost. Easy, he whispered, his voice low, rough with something she couldn't name. It'll be quick. Her breath caught, but he didn't take more than that. His hand lingered a moment longer against her cheek, then fell away. His restraint was what undid her, the gentleness of a man who could crush her and yet chose not to. For a long while, neither spoke. The stars wheeled above, the fire crackled, and the desert wind whispered through the pines. Finally, she said, barely audible, You could have done anything you wanted that night in the cave. Katan's eyes darkened. I am not animal, he said simply. You too soft. Too clean. She looked up sharply. Soft doesn't mean weak. He gave a small nod of respect. No, but it means heart will break easy. Clara stared into the fire again, her chest tight. Maybe he was right. Maybe her heart was breaking, splitting open to let something new take root. Later, when they lay down to sleep beneath the stars, she turned on her side and whispered, Katan? He made a low sound of acknowledgement. Have you ever loved anyone? He was silent for a long time. Then softly, once long ago. She died. Clara's throat ached. She wanted to ask more, but the sorrow in his tone silenced her. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing until sleep finally claimed her. When dawn came, Caton was already awake, staring toward the horizon. His profile was carved against the rising sun, strong, quiet, untamed. Clara didn't know what lay ahead, but one truth burned clear as daylight. Love, even when forbidden, was never quick. And it always hurt. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, as Caton and Clara descended into a valley shrouded in smoke. It wasn't the smoke of fire or destruction, but of home fires. The Apache village lay nestled among cottonwoods and red rock, dozens of lodges built from hide and willow poles. Drums echoed faintly in the distance. Clara's heart pounded as they entered. Eyes followed them, cold, curious, full of scorn. Children stopped their play, women froze mid-task, and warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. She could feel the hostility like heat pressing against her skin. Caton rode straight and proud, his expression unreadable. He spoke a few words to the guards, who quickly ran ahead to alert the chief. When they reached the center of the camp, Caton dismounted and helped Clara down. She trembled under the weight of so many stares. The Apache chief emerged from his lodge. His name was Tosani, a broad-shouldered man with long gray braids and eyes sharp as knives. Two warriors flanked him, their faces painted black. Tosani's gaze swept over Clara, then fixed on Caton. "What have you brought?" he demanded in Apache. Caton answered steadily. "A prisoner from the white wagons." The chief's eyes narrowed. "She still breathes. Why?" Caton hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I chose to spare her." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Anger, disbelief, accusation. Tosani's nostrils flared. "You question the will of your people? You defy your blood?" Clara didn't understand the words, but she could feel the tension thickening like thunder before a storm. Caton's voice rose fierce and clear as he replied. Tosani's face hardened. He barked an order, and two warriors seized Caton's arms. Clara gasped, trying to move forward, but another hand clamped down on her shoulder, shoving her to her knees. Tosani spoke again, this time in broken English. "He disobey, he weak. He brings shame. You will pay for his softness." Clara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Please, he saved me." "He didn't," but Tosani ignored her. He gave another command, and the warriors began dragging Caton toward the open square. "No!" Clara screamed, twisting free. She ran after them, stumbling on the uneven ground. "Please don't hurt him." The warriors halted, surprised by her defiance. The crowd hushed. Tosani stared at her for a long moment, then spoke quietly to Caton, who met his gaze without fear. Finally, the chief raised his hand. "If he wants you," Tosani said in English, his tone cutting, "then he must fight for you. If he wins, you live. If he dies, you both die." The meaning hit Clara like a blow. "No," she whispered. "No, please, oui," but Caton only looked at her once, his eyes calm, steady. Then he turned toward the circle of warriors who had already drawn their blades. The first man lunged. Caton dodged, striking with brutal precision. The fight became a blur of motion. Fists, knives, blood glinting under the setting sun. He took a deep cut to his arm, but didn't falter. Each time he fell, he rose again. Clara screamed his name, her voice raw, but he didn't look at her. He fought like a man possessed, each movement a vow, each strike a promise. Finally, the last warrior fell, the knife spinning from his hand. Caton stood over him, bloodied but unbroken. The camp fell silent except for the crackle of the nearby fires. Tosani's expression was unreadable. After a long pause, he lifted his staff. "He lives," the chief said at last. "The woman stays. She is his now." A murmur rippled through the tribe, shock, anger, and something darker. Caton turned to Clara. For a moment she saw the weariness behind his pride, the pain beneath his strength. He reached out, brushing the dust from her cheek. "You safe now," he said softly. But as the chief turned away, he added in his own tongue, a warning Clara didn't understand. "She will destroy you, Caton, as all white women destroy." Caton said nothing. Yet in his eyes burned a defiance that even Tosani's words could not quench. That night, as the drums beat slow and distant, Clara sat beside him in the shadows, her heart breaking for what he had done. For her, and for the war it had begun within his soul. The days that followed blurred together. Sunrise over red stone cliffs, smoke from morning fires curling into the clear sky. and the quiet murmurs of a people who never stopped watching her. Clara lived now among the Apache, but she was no part of them. The women glared when she fetched water from the river. Children whispered and threw pebbles when she passed. Even the old ones turned their faces away. Only Catan's presence kept the cruelty from becoming worse. His lodge stood at the edge of camp near the canyon wall. It was simple. 2 hides stretched over a frame, a small fire pit, and a bed of woven grass. He gave her space, speaking little, but his eyes always found her. He taught her words, 2 for water, shash for bear, ashen for fire. His voice was patient, his tone gentle. One evening, as she struggled to grind maize, a young Apache woman approached, the chief's daughter, Suna, proud and fierce. She spoke rapidly to Catan, anger flashing in her eyes. Clara didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. When Suna's voice rose, Catan's expression hardened. He answered sharply, ending the conversation. Suna glared at Clara one last time and stormed off. Clara frowned. What did she say? Catan didn't answer at first. He looked away, his hands tightening on the spear he was carving. She say I shame tribe, he said finally. Say I bring trouble because of you. Clara lowered her eyes. Maybe she's right. He turned toward her. No, you are not trouble. She almost laughed at that, but his voice carried a sincerity that stopped her. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the crickets and the low hum of the river. The stars above the canyon were brighter than any she had ever seen. She thought of her family, her father reading the Bible by lamplight, her mother humming hymns as the wagons rolled west. They had wanted to bring God's word to this land, but all Clara had found was grief. And yet, here in the heart of her captivity, she had found something else. Kindness where she expected cruelty, understanding where she expected scorn. At dawn, Catan handed her a small clay pot of wild berries. Eat, he said simply. She smiled faintly. You take care of me too much, he shrugged. You take care of me first. His words warmed her more than the morning sun. As the days passed, she began to move more freely. She helped the women gather wood, learned to grind cornmeal properly, and even made a friend, an older woman named Naye who had seen too much to still care about gossip. Naye told her stories of Catan, how his mother had died when he was young, how he had never taken a wife, how he had once been the tribe's best scout before he began questioning the chief's wars. That night, as Catan returned from a hunt, Clara found a scrap of paper buried beneath his belongings, a wanted poster, her name written in bold black ink. Reward $100 for the safe return of Miss Clara Whitmore. Her hands shook. She stared at the drawing, her face crudely sketched but recognizable. The world she had lost suddenly felt close again, calling to her like a ghost. Catan stepped inside and saw her holding the paper. His face darkened. You find this? She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. You kept it? He took it gently from her hands, folded it once, and threw it into the fire. The flames devoured it quickly. You want to go home? He asked, his tone unreadable. Her throat tightened. She should have said yes. She should have begged him to take her back to white civilization, to safety. Instead, she whispered, I don't know where home is anymore. Catan's eyes softened. He looked at her for a long moment before saying quietly, Home is where spirit rests. She stared into the fire, her pulse trembling. Then my spirit rests here, she said. He said nothing more, but his hand brushed hers as he passed. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental. But to Clara, it was everything. She was no longer sure which world she belonged to, only that her heart had already chosen. The night was heavy with wind, the scent of pine and dust carrying through the canyon. The Apache fires burned low, their embers glowing like 1,000 watchful eyes. Alara sat apart, her blanket wrapped tight around her trembling shoulders, her thoughts torn between fear and something dangerously close to longing. Talon stood near the edge of camp, sharpening his knife, his muscles glinting bronze in the firelight. His face was unreadable, strong, stoic, yet his eyes flicked toward her more often than before. Each glance sent a ripple through her chest. She remembered his words from earlier that day. If you leave, the world will hurt you more than I ever could. She hated that he might be right. When he approached, she didn't look up. You don't have to guard me anymore, she said softly. Your people have won. I'm no threat. Talon crouched beside her, his shadow swallowing hers. I do not guard you, White Dove, he murmured, using the name he'd given her when she had tried to run the first time. I stay because I cannot leave you. Her breath hitched. You're a warrior. You've taken captives before. Why am I different? He didn't answer right away. His fingers brushed the ends of her hair, rough and tender at once. Because you fight like no other, he said finally. Even when you're afraid, you face me with fire in your eyes. I should hate you for it. But I don't. She turned toward him then, her pulse wild. And if I said I wanted to go home? His jaw tightened. The knife in his hand gleamed in the firelight, then dropped to the earth with a dull thud. You will go back only when you can walk away without looking behind you. Alara's lips parted, a protest forming, but his hand cupped her cheek. Right now you look at me like you'd die if I let you go. Her heart ached at his words because they were true. Somewhere between the fear and the endless days of silence, she had begun to crave the way he looked at her, the safety of his arms, even the warmth of his rough voice when he said her name. But she couldn't let him know that. You're cruel, she whispered. You think I don't see it, but you've trapped me with your kindness. You make me feel safe, then remind me I'm not free. Talon's hand fell away. Love and freedom are the same, he said quietly. Both are a choice. You have not chosen yet. The fire cracked between them. Somewhere, a horse neighed in the dark. I can't stay, she said, tears spilling down her face. If I stay, I'll lose everything I was. He stepped closer until his breath mingled with hers. Then lose it, he whispered. Lose what the white men taught you. Lose their fear, their lies. Out here you can begin again. She shook her head, but he was already turning away, his voice low and final. Tomorrow I take you to the border. If you go, I won't stop you again. The words tore through her heart like the edge of his blade. That night, as the fires died and the sky turned a deep indigo, Alara lay awake, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade into the hills. For the first time, she didn't know what she wanted, to be free or to belong, because loving him did hurt. But the thought of leaving him hurt more, and as dawn crept across the desert, she realized that the real choice waiting for her wasn't about escape. It was about surrender. The dawn rose crimson over the desert, streaking the sky with the color of blood and promise. Alara watched it from the ridge where the campfire had died to ash. The Apache village lay quiet below, a scatter of tents and smoke. Talon's words from the night before haunted her like an echo she couldn't silence. Tomorrow I take you to the border. If you go, I won't stop you again. Now the moment had come. Talon approached on horseback, his figure carved against the morning light, tall, silent, unreadable. The second horse, a gray mare, followed beside him, its reins loose. Her horse. He didn't speak as he handed her the reins. His eyes lingered only a moment on her face, long enough for her to see the storm there, the restraint, the pain. Mount, he said simply. She obeyed, her fingers trembling as she gathered the reins. Every movement felt final, like the end of a story she hadn't realized she'd begun writing. As they rode from camp, the other Apaches watched in silence. Some nodded to Talon, others turned away, as if already mourning something they couldn't name. The trail wound through the canyons, where red rock glowed under the rising sun. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thud of hooves and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. After an hour, she finally spoke. You said you wouldn't stop me, but you don't have to take me yourself. His jaw tightened. It is not safe alone. I can take care of myself. A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. You said the same thing when you tried to run, remember? You fell into a ravine and I found you crying. Her cheeks flushed. I wasn't crying. He looked at her then, really looked, and his voice softened. You were, and I knew then that your tears would ruin me. She turned away quickly, blinking back the sting behind her own eyes. The desert stretched wide around them, endless and merciless. By midday they reached the borderlands, where the desert met a winding river, and beyond it lay the rough edge of a white settlement. The sound of hammering echoed faintly from afar, the first signs of her world returning. Talon dismounted first and held out his hand to help her down. She hesitated before taking it. His grip was warm and steady, the same hand that had once bound her wrists and later gently freed them. This is where your people begin again, he said quietly, and where mine end. The river shimmered between them, shallow but strong. A symbol, a wall. She took a step forward, her boots sinking into the soft sand. The wind tugged at her skirt, at her hair, urging her onward. She could almost see the shape of her old life waiting beyond the horizon, but it felt so small now, so far away from the woman she'd become. "Talon," she whispered, turning back. "When you took me, I thought you were my captor." He said nothing. "But now," her voice broke, "now I think you're the only one who ever saw me." He didn't move, but his throat worked as he swallowed hard. "Then remember me," he said roughly. "When the wind comes through your windows, when the rain touches your face. Remember I did not hurt you. I set you free." She wanted to speak, to beg him not to let her go, but her heart betrayed her voice. Instead, she crossed the river. The cold water stung her skin, shocking her breath away. When she reached the other side, she turned once more. Talon still stood there, his figure framed by the endless desert, his face unreadable beneath the rising sun. Then he raised his hand to his heart, a gesture of farewell among his people. Her lips trembled, but she returned the sign. Slowly, painfully, knowing she had left something behind that no river could wash away. And as she walked toward the white world beyond the ridge, her heart whispered the truth she couldn't say aloud. She would ride back to him. Days turned into weeks, yet the ache in Alara's chest only grew sharper. The settlement she had returned to, a cluster of weather-beaten cabins and weary faces, felt smaller than she remembered. The laughter was hollow, the routines mechanical. Her old life didn't fit anymore, like a dress she had outgrown but couldn't yet throw away. People whispered when she passed. They said she'd been taken by savages. They said she should thank God she'd come back alive. Alara smiled politely, but their words felt like knives. None of them knew the truth, how the Apache warrior had treated her not as prey but as something sacred. How the fire in his eyes had taught her to live again. At night she would wake to the memory of his voice, that deep rumble saying her name, White Dove. Sometimes she swore she could still feel the weight of his hand against her skin, the steady rhythm of his heart against her ear. She tried to bury those thoughts beneath chores, beneath duty. The local pastor's wife offered her sewing work, and Alara accepted it. Each stitch was supposed to bring order, peace, but each time the needle pierced the cloth, she saw his face instead. Strong, unyielding, tender in ways no one else had ever been. One evening, a storm rolled over the plains. The wind rattled the shutters and the thunder cracked like cannon fire. Alara stood at the window, watching the lightning dance across the horizon. For one dizzying moment she imagined she saw him there, Talon standing on a distant ridge watching her as he once had. Her heart leapt, wild and foolish. She pressed a hand to the glass. "No," she whispered. "He's gone." But the wind howled louder, almost like a voice answering her denial. Then came the messenger. A young trapper rode into town the next morning, his horse lathered and breathless. He stopped by the trading post asking for the white woman who'd lived among the Apaches. Alara went to meet him, her heart pounding. "You're her?" he asked. "The one they called White Dove?" Her lips parted. "I was. What is it?" He hesitated, eyes filled with the kind of sorrow that made her knees weaken. "There's word from the South Territories. The Apaches fought the army last week. Many were killed." She felt the air leave her lungs. "And their leader?" The trapper looked away. Tall man, braids with silver in them, fought like the devil himself, they said. Took 3 bullets before he fell. Her body swayed, the ground tilting beneath her feet. The trapper caught her arm. "I'm sorry, miss. But if you knew him, he fought like a man who had something worth dying for." That night she didn't sleep. She packed what little she had, her shawl, a flask of water, a small carving he'd made her from bone shaped like a hawk. The world she had returned to no longer mattered. By dawn she was riding south. The plains stretched wide before her, endless and golden under the early light. Every hoofbeat echoed her heartbeat. Talon, Talon, Talon. Her mind fought her body's exhaustion, her fear, her grief. But deeper than all of it was something fierce and alive, a flame that refused to die. When the desert rose to meet her again, she dismounted and walked the last miles. The land was scarred, blackened from fire, littered with broken spears. The scent of smoke and death hung thick, and yet she felt him. She fell to her knees where the earth was still warm, pressing her palms to the ground. "You're here," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can feel you." Then faintly a sound reached her ears, the rustle of a horse, the crunch of boots on stone. Her heart froze. It couldn't be. But when she lifted her head, a shadow stood against the dying sun, tall, unbroken and alive, Talon. And this time, she ran to him without hesitation. The sun hung low, gilding the desert in molten gold as Ilara stumbled across the burned plain. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her dress torn, her heart pounding as if trying to break free from her chest. And then there he was. Talon stood at the crest of the hill, his dark hair unbound, his body marked with wounds and dust but unmistakably alive. The sight of him tore a sob from her throat. She ran, her feet catching on the scorched earth, her tears blurring everything but the man before her. When she reached him, she didn't stop to speak. She collided into his chest, her arms wrapping around him as though she could keep him from ever slipping away again. He caught her instantly, his strong hands trembling as they held her. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice hoarse, the sound breaking something deep within her. She pulled back just enough to look at him. "They told me you were dead." He brushed a thumb along her cheek, wiping away her tears. "I was close," he said softly. "But death has no claim on a man who still has something to live for." Her lips trembled. "You should have gone north. You should have saved yourself." Talon's eyes darkened, full of that fierce, patient fire she remembered so well. "And leave my heart behind? No. The spirits brought me back to you." For a long moment they simply stood there, the silence between them filled with everything they'd left unsaid. The wind carried the smell of rain and smoke, the whisper of the dying fire around them. The world had burned, but they were still standing. Finally she spoke, voice shaking. "There's nothing left here. Your people, your land." He nodded slowly. "The war has taken much, but what remains is what we choose to build." He took her hands, rough palms enveloping hers. "You came back to me, White Dove. You crossed the line between two worlds for me. Will you cross it again, this time to stay?" Her heart swelled with both fear and certainty. She thought of the life she'd left behind, the cold stares, the whispered pity, the endless emptiness. Then she looked at him, the man who had taught her what it meant to breathe, to belong, to love. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay." His lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that began in his eyes and reached all the way to her soul. "Then the wind will carry our names together. You and I, we will make a new tribe. Not of blood, but of choice." He leaned forward then, his forehead resting against hers. The desert wind stilled as if the earth itself held its breath. When he kissed her, it was gentle. Nothing like the fierce warrior she had once feared. His mouth was warm, reverent, tasting of dust and rain and promise. When they parted, she laughed softly through her tears. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. Echoing her frightened words from that first night, Talon's dark eyes softened with memory. "No," he whispered. "Not when love teaches you how to heal." The storm clouds broke then, releasing a soft, cleansing rain. It fell over the wasteland, hissing against the ashes, bringing the scent of renewal. Ilara tilted her face upward, letting the drops fall over her skin. Beside her, Talon lifted his arms to the sky, his expression serene as though he was thanking the heavens themselves. They stood together in the rain, two broken souls remade by fire and forgiveness. When the sun broke through again, a rainbow curved over the desert, bright and fragile yet unyielding. And beneath it, a warrior and a woman began walking toward the horizon, hand in hand. They had no tribe, no home, no past to return to. But they had love, and in the Wild West that was the rarest victory of all.